Hi, real recap here. Today I'm going to explain a sci-fi thriller movie called Doors. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens as a man in his underwear walks into a forest, appearing disoriented. At the same time, we hear a 911 call in which a woman reports that her husband has wandered into the forest and gone missing. Another call comes in, and someone explains that they are trapped in their room and unable to leave. A third then call comes in from someone who says they saw several people standing completely still in front of the door. The scene then shifts to a classroom where a teacher named Mr. Johnson is getting ready to conduct the SAT exams for a group of students. The group includes girls Lizzie, Ash, Rory, and a guy named Jake. Johnson then collects everyone's phones and locks them in a cabinet to make sure no one's cheating. As soon as the exam begins, Jake throws a piece of paper meant for Lizzie, but it mistakenly lands on Ash's desk. She picks it up and realizes that Jake is inviting Lizzie to make out afterward. When Johnson notices the disruption, he urges the students to focus on their papers. Shortly after, the phones locked in the cabinet start ringing constantly, causing a distraction in the exam hall. Johnson also receives a call, and when he answers it, he's visibly distressed by what he hears. He then asks Rory to keep an eye on the other students before abruptly exiting the room. Some time passes, but the teacher still doesn't return. The phones in the cabinet also continue to ring, which worries the students. When Jake can't take it any longer, he gets up and tries to open the cabinet, while Rory asks him to stop. At this moment, everyone hears an announcement over a speaker, instructing the kids to lock themselves in the classroom and not go anywhere. The announcer appears nervous and is shaking, sending everyone into a state of panic. The students then turn on the radio to find out what's going on outside. They hear several distressing news reports, revealing that something has landed on Earth and the military is trying to figure it out. Moments later, they hear gunshots from outside, and suddenly a dead bird crashes against the classroom window. Terrified, the group breaks open the cabinet and finally retrieves their phones. They then notice numerous missed calls and texts from their families. During this time, Ash begins to experience strange hallucinations and leaves the classroom, followed by her friends. They are shocked to find the hallway empty, with no teachers or students in sight. The group then comes across a strange door that blocks the entire hallway. When they throw some objects at it, the door immediately sucks them inside. Everyone is terrified by this, but Ash grows curious and suggests they should try it to see where it leads. Her words freak the others out and they immediately leave from there. Regardless, Ash continues to stare at the mysterious door and becomes mesmerized. She is about to enter when Lizzie suddenly appears and pulls her away. However, Ash misinterprets her intentions and begins to kiss Lizzie, which is noticed by Jake. He becomes furious at her for touching his girlfriend, leading to a heated argument between them. During the confrontation, Ash accidentally pushes Jake toward the door, sucking him in along with Rory, who was nearby. This makes her feel guilty, so she ends up entering the portal herself, leaving only Lizzie behind in the hallway. Next, we see some shots of the city, which is now completely deserted after millions of people have gone missing. A news reporter reveals that, while many people have disappeared, some have miraculously managed to return from the door. Scientists are trying to figure out what's going on, so they have developed Project Knockers. It turns out they deliberately sent volunteers to the mysterious door, who will report back on their experiences when they return. In the next scene, we meet three such volunteers, a couple named Vince and Becky, along with their friend, Patrick. They are instructed that they can only stay beyond the door for 12 minutes since if they stay longer, the door might take control of them. The trio soon arrives at a house wearing a spacesuit, where they encounter the mysterious door. As they get closer, each of them hears strange, unsettling sounds coming from within. Once inside, they find themselves in a large house with 3 doors arranged in a spherical pattern. Becky suggests they split up to explore the different rooms and gather as much information as possible. Later, we see Patrick exploring the strange place and reporting his findings to his superiors. He soon hears the sound of someone crying in the distance and follows it. Shortly after, he reaches a room where he notices a woman lying in bed, surrounded by an abundance of flowers. Patrick updates his superiors about the discovery and asks for the woman's name. She responds that her name is Rose and scolds him for forgetting her so quickly. This leaves Patrick bewildered, as he has never seen this woman before in his life. Meanwhile, Becky finds herself in a white kitchen with all of the utensils arranged in weird positions. She then notices an empty cradle that is moving by itself. She stops it, and moments later, sees the shadow of a person cast on the door. Meanwhile, Vince enters the third door and informs his team that the room is elegantly furnished. He notices a clock on the wall with the time 3 o'clock, as well as a statue. Moving to another room, he finds a clock displaying 6 o'clock and the same statue, but with a different expression. He then moves on and comes across another clock showing 9 o'clock and the same statue with square-shaped eyes. Returning to Patrick, he tries to communicate with the strange woman, but she suddenly experiences a seizure and begs for his help. Patrick rushes to assist her, but she soon begins laughing, revealing it was all an act. She then pleads with him not to leave her again, and although confused, Patrick reluctantly agrees. With only 5 minutes remaining, Patrick's helmet suddenly starts filling with flowers, while the woman watches in amusement. As the petals overwhelm him, Patrick struggles to breathe and eventually ends up passing away. Meanwhile, Becky experiences a hallucination in which she is with her boyfriend Vince and is pregnant. This vision makes her very emotional because it turns out that she has lost her child in reality. The illusionary Vince tries to convince her that this is her true reality, but Becky refuses to believe it and shoots him with a phaser gun. Elsewhere, Vince is trying to escape when he stumbles into another room where he meets 2 other versions of himself. The 3 then get into an argument about which one of them is the real Vince. In a sinister twist, the 2 fake versions somehow change his spacesuit clothes, making him indistinguishable from them. Shortly after, Becky arrives at the same room and is confused by the sight of multiple Vinces. Each one tries to convince her that he is the real Vince. An annoyed Becky quickly shoots one of them, noticing his wearing winter clothes in the middle of summer. However, she is still unsure about the other 2, so she questions them about their lives and relationships. She eventually manages to identify the real Vince, but then something takes control of her, and she ends up shooting him. This overwhelms her with guilt and she decides to take her own life as well. In the next scene, we meet a scientist named Jamal Adkins, who is listening to a radio in the morning. The news report states that half of the world's population has already gone missing due to the door. We also learn that Project Knockers has failed miserably, with almost all of the volunteers not making it back. As a result, the public is advised to immediately call the police and report any sightings of the door. After this, Jamal turns off the radio and heads to a nearby forest. He soon arrives at one of the mysterious doors and sets up his equipment to establish communication with it. After several attempts, the door finally replies, which shocks the man. The door seems to know everything about the scientist, including his name and his social security number. Jamal then begins asking the door various questions, and it responds in a friendly manner, even calling him buddy. Curious, Jamal asks where the door came from and what it wants. It reveals that it comes from an advanced civilization and is here to observe humanity and archive its existence. Sometime later, Jamal invites his scientist friend Kathy to his house, and she arrives with her young boyfriend, Leo. Jamal is skeptical of Leo, but he eventually chooses to trust Kathy's judgment. He informs them that he has found a door in the woods. Both are shocked to hear this, and Leo suggests they should report it, but Jamal clarifies that not all doors are bad. He explains that he has successfully communicated with it and it seems very cooperative and friendly. Following this, they proceed to the forest, where Jamal shows them the door. He sets up his equipment again and demonstrates how he communicates with it. He introduces Kathy and Leo to the door, which greets them in a friendly manner. Kathy is ecstatic as she realizes this is revolutionary and has the potential to change everything. However, Leo remains skeptical, so he steps away for a moment to call someone and report what he has discovered. Meanwhile, Kathy continues to converse with the door and asks for its name. The door responds that its name is Lamage, which is actually Jamal spelled backward. Kathy then asks why it is here, and Lamage explains that it is here to study humans and archive their existence. Hearing this, Kathy becomes very excited and feels that she can uncover the secrets of the entire universe through Lamage. She tells Jamal that they can finally become the cosmic explorers they've always dreamed of. This vision makes her very emotional because it turns out that she has lost her child in reality. The illusionary Vince tries to convince her that this is her true reality, but Becky refuses to believe it and shoots him with a phaser gun. Elsewhere, Vince is trying to escape when he stumbles into another room where he meets two other versions of himself. The three then get into an argument about which one of them is the real Vince. In a sinister twist, the two fake versions somehow change his spacesuit clothes, making him indistinguishable from them. Shortly after, Becky arrives at the same room and is confused by the sight of multiple Vinces. Each one tries to convince her that he is the real Vince. An annoyed Becky quickly shoots one of them, noticing his wearing winter clothes in the middle of summer. However, she is still unsure about the other two, so she questions them about their lives and relationships. She eventually manages to identify the real Vince, but then something takes control of her, and she ends up shooting him. This overwhelms her with guilt and she decides to take her own life as well. In the next scene, we meet a scientist named Jamal Adkins, who is listening to a radio in the morning. The news report states that half of the world's population has already gone missing due to the door. We also learn that Project Knockers has failed miserably, with almost all of the volunteers not making it back. As a result, the public is advised to immediately call the police and report any sightings of the door. After this, Jamal turns off the radio and heads to a nearby forest. He soon arrives at one of the mysterious doors and sets up his equipment to establish communication with it. After several attempts, the door finally replies, which shocks the man. The door seems to know everything about the scientist, including his name and his social security number. Jamal then begins asking the door various questions, and it responds in a friendly manner, even calling him buddy. Curious, Jamal asks where the door came from and what it wants. It reveals that it comes from an advanced civilization and is here to observe humanity and archive its existence. Sometime later, Jamal invites his scientist friend Kathy to his house, and she arrives with her young boyfriend, Leo. Jamal is skeptical of Leo, but he eventually chooses to trust Kathy's judgment. He informs them that he has found a door in the woods. Both are shocked to hear this, and Leo suggests they should report it, but Jamal clarifies that not all doors are bad. He explains that he has successfully communicated with it and it seems very cooperative and friendly. Following this, they proceed to the forest, where Jamal shows them the door. He sets up his equipment again and demonstrates how he communicates with it. He introduces Kathy and Leo to the door, which greets them in a friendly manner. Kathy is ecstatic as she realizes this is revolutionary and has the potential to change everything. However, Leo remains skeptical, so he steps away for a moment to call someone and report what he has discovered. Meanwhile, Kathy continues to converse with the door and asks for its name. The door responds that its name is Lamage, which is actually Jamal spelled backward. Kathy then asks why it is here, and Lamage explains that it is here to study humans and archive their existence. Hearing this, Kathy becomes very excited and feels that she can uncover the secrets of the entire universe through Lamage. She tells Jamal that they can finally become the cosmic explorers they've always dreamed of. However, to their dismay, a cop named Ricky arrives, who turns out to be Leo's friend. He immediately points a gun at Kathy and orders her to step back from the door, as it could be dangerous. After that, he arrests Jamal for engaging with the door instead of reporting it, which is against the law. When Ricky asks for his name, the door responds on his behalf, revealing that he is Jamal. This shocks the cop as he has never encountered a talking door before. Before Ricky can process this, Kathy strikes him with a branch, causing him to accidentally shoot Leo to death. Horrified, the cop points his gun at Jamal and tries to shoot him, so the scientist asks Lamage for help. In response, the door somehow hypnotizes the cop, causing him to shoot himself to death. Both Kathy and Jamal are devastated by the turn of events but also feel relieved to be safe. The door then calls them friends and reveals that it's time for them to be refreshed. At this moment, they notice many celestial objects appearing falling from the sky and become excited. In the next scene, we see a streamer named Midnight Martin in a video meeting with a parallel world expert called Dr. Alan Price. Throughout the introduction, Alan appears too weird, as if he's being controlled by something. Martin asks him about the doors, what they want, and what will happen next. Alan responds that the arrival of the doors has changed everything, and humans are now cosmically evolving. He emphasizes that humanity is entering a new era as they learn to live in a changed world. Regardless, Martin remains skeptical of the doors and their purpose. He asks the expert if they should prepare to fight against the doors for their survival. But Alan responds that there is nothing they can do to stop them, as the doors are the ones who decide and control everything. Hearing this, Martin feels uncomfortable and asks how they should deal with the situation. Alan asserts that all they can do is wait to be refreshed, but Martin laughs at the idea of comparing humans to a web browser. During their conversation, the lights start to flicker, and there's a brief network outage. When it resumes, Martin wonders if the people who come back from the door are altered, but Alan replies that he already knows the answer. He then calls the streamer by his real name, Paul, which no one else is aware of. Hearing this, a shocked Martin wonders how Alan knows this, but the latter tells him to accept the door, promising that all his fears and insecurities will be erased and refreshed. After that, Martin tries to say something, but Alan predicts what he is going to say each time, leaving him even more confused. In the final scene, something suddenly takes control of Martin, causing him to begin screaming in pain. Meanwhile, Alan observes everything with a weird smile and urges the streamer to accept the door. After a series of frantic screams and bizarre movements, Martin tears off his clothes. He then suddenly becomes silent and calmly heads upstairs. The movie comes to an end as the broadcast goes off, and Alan greets him with welcome. At the beginning of the film, several bandits entered Myanmar with a small boat to carry out a chemical weapons transaction with a general from Myanmar named General Thihar. The chemical weapon was called VX nerve gas, which could kill the whole population of a city in just a few hours. The general's confidant, NY, said that the general ordered him to carry out this transaction, but before buying the weapon he wanted to test it first. He had prepared a drunken local to be used as a guinea pig. The person was put in a plastic chamber and the gas was released in small quantities. It only took a few seconds for the person to die in a very tragic way. After testing the weapon, NY immediately paid the people and told them to leave Myanmar. He and his men then took the canisters by car to a place that had been determined upon arrival there. General Thihar told NY that they would immediately resell the weapon to customers from war countries. At the same time, the CIA was holding a meeting. They had been looking for VX nerve gas, which was very dangerous. Production of the gas had been stopped, but there were still people out there who kept the weapons. The leader of the CIA asked the others to immediately trace the weapon wherever it was. The next day, a martial arts training ground called Golden Tiger belonged to General Thihar was going to hold a tournament, and for that the general hired a local trainer named Cho to train the fighters. The general called 2 fighters to train with his champion, and if the 2 could beat his champion, the general would give them a small prize. After that, everyone was gathered and the fight began. In the end, the general's champion succeeded in defeating the 2 fighters very easily. In America, 2 people were fighting for the kickboxing tournament. After a long match, the fighter named Scott Schiff won the match. It was known that Schiff competed in the fight not to get a lot of money but to pursue a hobby. At the same time, the CIA held another meeting because there was a discovery that could lead them to the VX. It turned out that they managed to find a man who died in Myanmar with a trace of VX in his body. They immediately suspected General Thihar because the area was under the general's control. After holding the meeting, the CIA immediately contacted one of their agents who lived in Myanmar named Nick Buckley, who was asked by CIA to find out about General Thihar. A few days later, Schiff was training when suddenly his cell phone rang and it was the CIA calling. He was asked to immediately come to the office as it turned out that he was one of the CIA's members. Before leaving, his coach asked if he still wanted to work as an agent or wanted to focus on kickboxing. Schiff answered that he might quit the CIA because he was only their data analyst. When Schiff arrived at the office, one of his fellow analysts asked why he rarely came to work even though his father used to be the CIA's best agent. Schiff answered that maybe he wouldn't be able to be like his father because he was just a data analyst. After that, Schiff entered the chairman's office because the chairman wanted to talk to him. At first, Schiff wanted to express his intention to resign, but before he had time to say it, the chairman explained that she called him because he would be assigned to a mission. Immediately, Schiff gave up his intention because his dream was to become an agent like his late father. The chairman explained about the VX chemical weapon and that it was suspected to be in the hands of General Thihar from Myanmar. She would assign Schiff to go there and look for the weapon. She had collaborated with a person named Cho to help Schiff. She also introduced one of his former agents who lived in Myanmar, Buckley, who would be involved in this mission after that. Schiff was given a watch that could detect the VX. He just needed to press the watch and the army would come in 14 minutes. Hearing that, Schiff asked why the CIA didn't just send the armies to raid the place. The chairman said that she couldn't because they had to confirm first whether the VX was actually there or not to carry out the raid. Meanwhile, Cho met the general's confidant. Ny Cho told him that the MMA fighter from America who was invited to come was experiencing an injury, so he suggested inviting the kickboxing champion Schiff. It was revealed that the general wanted to invite 3 fighters from various countries to appear at his tournament. After that, NY met the general to explain that the MMA fighter was injured and would be replaced with the kickboxing champion. The general, who didn't want to be bothered, didn't mind this. The next day, Schiff arrived in Myanmar and he was greeted by the general's envoys. The man said that they had to ride a train for 3 hours to arrive at the Golden Tiger. At the same time, the CIA had prepared a drone to monitor Schiff. In short, when Schiff was on the train, he realized that he was on the train with the other fighters. One from China was skilled in Wu, and behind him was one from France who was known to be very brutal. After getting off the train, the fighters were picked up by car and they arrived at the Golden Tiger soon after. Each of them had to pass through very tight security before entering the area. When Schiff was being checked, the guard took his watch and wanted to take it as a gift, but Schiff gave him some money and finally the watch was returned, but not with his cell phone. After undergoing the check, Schiff was taken to the training ground. He was shown General there and NY, including a local trainer who happened to be there, namely Cho. Schiff was taken to the room where he would stay until the tournament was over. In the afternoon, Schiff was secretly woken up by Cho. Cho said that Schiff should go for a walk in the area to look for the VX instead of sleeping, considering that he had a watch to detect the VX. Hearing this, Schiff asked Cho to bring the watch with him and look for the weapon himself. Cho explained that he couldn't freely go around the area, especially since many guards were always watching him, while Schiff could freely go out pretending to want to look around. Cho suggested that Schiff start walking around after dinner. A few hours later, Cho came home and his daughter was waiting for him. She was May and she worked in a bar owned by an American. Cho told him about his annoyance about Schiff, who was supposed to be looking for the VX but instead was busy sleeping. Meanwhile, Schiff had just finished dinner. He then infiltrated the general's residence. He immediately set his watch so that he would be monitored by the CIA via satellite. After avoiding several guards, he accidentally made a sound causing him to be caught. The general's confidant NY immediately attacked Schiff until finally all the guards arrived and Schiff was cornered. General Thiha came soon after and asked what happened. Schiff explained that he just wanted to take a walk to relieve his fatigue, but the general's men attacked him. Hearing this, the general ordered his men to take Schiff back to his room. After Schiff left, the general asked NY to keep an eye on Schiff. The next day, when Schiff was training, he was offered a drink by a teenager. He accepted it and thanked the boy, but when the boy offered the drink to the fighter from France, the fighter got angry because he didn't like the drink. The fighter from China, who got splashed by the drink, immediately slapped the fighter from France and there was almost a commotion. Fortunately, the two were separated by the guards. Not long after that, Schiff was approached by Cho, who asked Schiff to go to the changing room. After he entered the changing room, Cho asked about last night's incident because Schiff shouldn't have been discovered by the guards. Schiff told him not to worry because the general believed that he was just walking around that night. Even though the general was starting to suspect him, Schiff explained that he was sure that General Thiha did not keep the VX in there but in another place. Cho, who heard this, advised Schiff to go to this certain bar this evening. In the afternoon, a man from the Middle East came to the Golden Tiger and he was immediately greeted and invited to go to the general's residence. Schiff, who saw their arrival, immediately checked his watch, but there was no reaction from the watch. The man went inside and finally met General Thiha. It turned out that the man intended to buy the VX from the general for war purposes. Long story short, that evening General Thiha gathered some people to give the buyer a small welcoming event. He held a Muaythai fight between two locals. Music. After the battle, the general explained that this was all just the beginning because the real battle would be held tomorrow. On the other hand, Cho secretly asked Schiff to go to a bar in the West End and it was the right time to go there, but NY and his subordinates had realized their plan. When Cho wanted to leave, he was stopped and asked to meet the general. When Cho faced General Thiha, he was asked who he worked for and who Schiff was. It turned out that the general had been eyeing Cho for a while. Cho certainly didn't want to admit it, but the general said that his hunch never went wrong. Cho was tortured and then interrogated again. The general threatened to kill him and his daughter, but Cho wasn't scared in the slightest. He said that the general was a bad person who should die. From there, the general was convinced that Cho and Schiff were the CIA's spies. He ordered his men to lock Cho up, while for Schiff he asked his champion fighter to kill Schiff in the arena. On the other hand, Schiff was in a bar. According to orders from Cho, he was greeted by Ma because she happened to be the manager at the bar. Apparently, she already knew who Schiff was, and she also said that she was Cho's daughter. When they were busy chatting, a customer behind them made a commotion. Seeing this, May immediately approached the man and asked the man to calm down, but the man ignored her warning and she had to beat him. It turns out that she was quite skilled in self-defense and she mastered a little Muay Thai. Not long after that, Schiff was visited by the bar owner, who turned out to be Nick Buckley. Nick asked him to come to his office. Nick explained that in the past, he was Schiff's father's partner and often carried out dangerous missions with him, but unfortunately Schiff's father died while carrying out his last mission. After that, Nick asked whether Schiff had found the VX. Schiff answered that he hadn't found anything. In the end, Nick asked Schiff to hand over the watch to him because he would be the one going to look for the VX outside the Golden Tiger. Nick also asked Schiff to return to the Golden Tiger so that the general wouldn't suspect him the next morning. When May came home, she was shocked. Because Cho didn't come home, she realized that her father's disguise would have been discovered, so she immediately went to Nick and told him about it. Nick said that if they wanted to save Cho, they had to look for the VX immediately at the Golden Tiger. The general was giving an opening speech for the tournament. The first match would be a match between a fighter from France against a fighter from China. The general explained that the fighter from France was the champion of Savit, while the fighter from China was the champion of Wu. Then the fight began. Soon after, during the fight, the general told his buyer that he held this tournament as a form of respect for him. After a fierce fight, the fighter from China managed to win the match. During the break, the general told his buyer that the VX was being transported and they would make transactions at his second headquarters. He also asked for a payment of $2.5 million for each canister. Meanwhile, in the changing room, Schiff was approached by NY. Schiff immediately asked where Cho was. NY answered that Cho was having family matters and asked Schiff to get to the arena because he would fight against the general's champion. The general's champion, who was previously asked to finish off Schiff, was overwhelmed. Even though he managed to land several punches, it was clear that Schiff was superior to him. Schiff was able to corner him, but suddenly the fight was stopped. And when determining the winner, the referee, who was the general's subordinate, fraudulently gave the victor to the general's champion. The buyer, who saw the match, said to the general that the general's champion should have been the one who lost the match. On the other hand, the general's lackey was taking the VX from the forest to be transported to the general's second base. Meanwhile, Nick and May were still looking for it using the watch, until at one point the watch started beeping, indicating that the VX was around. They then saw the weapon transport car and immediately followed it, but not long after that, the general's men realized that they were being followed. To avoid suspicion, Nick asked May to get out of the car and pretend to be shopping. After that, Nick, who saw the car leaving, immediately chased it while leaving May, but not long after, the general's lackey stopped him and immediately beat him. May, who saw this from afar, immediately stopped a rickshaw to chase the general's lackey. The car carrying the VX turned to an abandoned temple, which turned out to be the general's second base. Meanwhile, Nick was taken to the Golden Tiger. Schiff, who was in the changing room, said that he was going to leave the Golden Tiger and said that in the match earlier he should have been the winner. Suddenly the general's lackey covered his face and took him somewhere. Schiff was locked up with Nick in the back of the Golden Tiger. Nick had time to tell Schiff about his father, who was killed on a mission. It turned out that his father died because he preferred to die to save Nick, and that was why Nick was indebted to him. And he would never forget that. Not long after, the general came in and said that he had a surprise for them. Soon a doctor came to finish off them with poison. After that, the general told the guard outside not to leave before Nick and Schiff were killed while he was going to the second headquarters to carry out the transaction. A few minutes later, May had succeeded in infiltrating the Golden Tiger. She immediately took down the guard, but unfortunately she was late because Nick had just been injected with poison by the doctor, so he couldn't be saved. May took the watch and gave it to Schiff. They were forced to leave Nick. They were caught by the guards, so they had to fight them first. After they managed to escape, May told Schiff that the VX might be in the general's second headquarters. She also believed that her father was there, therefore they decided to immediately go to the general's second headquarters. They arrived at the location soon after. When they approached the car parked outside, the watch suddenly beeped, indicating that the VX was inside the car. Schiff asked May to look around while he was Going to open the car lock after finding a screwdriver, he immediately opened it and managed to find the VX. He pressed his sophisticated watch to mark his location to the CIA. At the same time, May was caught by the guards and she had no other choice but to fight them. Fortunately, May was helped by Schiff to take them down. May planned to go inside while Schiff would go from the other way. Meanwhile, inside the headquarters, General Thihar was about to test the VX and Cho would be his guinea pig. When Cho was about to be put in a glass chamber, May appeared, but she could easily be cornered by the buyer. In the end, the general planned to put May and Cho into the chamber. Suddenly they were shocked by one of the guards who fell from the top floor. It turned out it was Schiff. Schiff told the buyer that the general was a fraud and the general had manipulated the match, which he should have won, and for that he wanted to challenge the general's champion to a duel with him. If he won, then Cho and May must be released, and if he lost, then he was willing to enter the chamber. Initially the general refused the challenge, but fortunately the buyer wanted to see the fight, so the general was forced to accept the challenge. In the fight, Schiff succeeded in defeating the general's fighter by kicking him into the chamber along with the general. Then the VX gas was sprayed into the chamber, followed by CIA troops who came throwing smoke grenades. As a result, the buyer and everyone who was there were captured, while the general and his fighter were killed due to inhaling the VX gas. After that incident, the CIA chairman contacted Schiff to thank him, and Schiff would be reassigned to another place. The chairman also thanked May and her father Cho.